"Get your filthy hands off my seat, boy." Those were the very first words that came out of Rebecca Palmer's mouth as Darius Cole stepped towards seat 2A on Flight 932 from Seattle to Washington, D.C. No polite greeting, no hint of courtesy, not even a question. Just that sharp, cutting command loud enough to draw blood. Heads turned instantly. Every person in the first-class cabin looked up, eyes wide. Some gasped softly. Others buried themselves in their phones, pretending not to notice. A few slyly angled their cameras upward, recording from their laps in quiet fascination. But no one spoke. Darius froze mid-step in the narrow aisle, the boarding pass still between his fingers. The card clearly read, Seat 2A. He glanced at it once, then at the woman who had shoved aside his carry-on and settled into his spot, as if she owned the entire row. Rebecca, wrapped in an immaculate white pantsuit, diamonds glittering on both wrists, crossed her legs with slow precision. She sank deeper into the seat, claiming both armrests like a queen reclaiming her throne. Her voice turned syrupy, but the sweetness carried venom. "You people always try to slip into places that don't belong to you." The air went still. The tension was so thick you could hear it hum. Darius didn't answer. He didn't need to. His expression remained unreadable, calm, collected, though behind his eyes something shifted, something observant and calculating. That's when the flight attendant appeared, Chloe Simmons, mid-20s, hair in a tight blonde ponytail, her practiced smile trembling. She glanced from Rebecca to Darius, then made a snap judgment. "Sir," she said evenly, "I believe you're in the wrong section. Economy is just behind you." Darius lifted his boarding pass again. "It says 2A. Chloe didn't even glance down. "Please move now, sir." A teenager 2 rows back lifted his phone and began a live stream. Within minutes, the clip would be titled, "When a Black CEO Gets Kicked Out of His Own Seat." Within an hour, it would explode across TikTok, a trending storm watched by hundreds of thousands. But right now, Darius simply stood there, silent, absorbing it all. If this scene makes your chest tighten or your pulse rise, then you're exactly the audience this story is meant for. Because this isn't just a flight, it's a mirror. And what comes next will test everything you think you know about power, perception, and race in America. Stay with it. Watch closely. Some truths must be witnessed to be believed. Rebecca didn't budge. She leaned back into the plush leather seat as if it were made exclusively for her. "Some people need to be reminded of their place," she muttered loudly, making sure every nearby passenger heard. Chloe still hadn't looked at Darius's ticket. Now she stood straighter, her posture forming an invisible barrier between him and the seat he had paid for. "Sir, this is the final warning," she said tightly. "Professional, but only by definition. Please proceed to your assigned seat in the back." 2 rows down, a man shifted his earbuds, feigning sleep. A woman in seat 1D turned toward the window, her reflection catching her eyes, and the guilt she couldn't quite face. Darius remained composed. "Ma'am," he said quietly, raising the pass again. "This seat is mine. Darius Cole, 2A. Check the manifest." Chloe waved a dismissive hand, irritation bleeding into her tone. "I don't have time for games. You can't just stroll into first class because you feel like it." From her self-appointed throne in 2A, Rebecca added smoothly, "Honestly, it's pathetic. I've been a Platinum Elite member for 12 years. I've flown this route more times than I can count." "You heard her," Chloe said, arms crossed now, siding without question. "She's a loyal customer. I'm sure she's right." The prejudice wasn't new. It was polished, refined, systemic. Rebecca reached into her Chanel bag, pulling out her Delta app. "See, right here. Seat 2A. Told you." She held the screen up like a badge of honor. Chloe nodded without checking Darius's pass again. Behind them, a girl named Sophia tapped her phone screen. She was 16, headed to visit colleges with her dad. She had just started streaming live on TikTok a few minutes ago, and now her viewer count had doubled. "This is wild," Sophia whispered to her phone. "They won't even check the guy's boarding pass just because he's black and wearing a hoodie." Darius looked around the cabin. No one intervened. No one said a word. He could feel the heat rising in his chest. Not anger, but history. The long weight of generations pushed into this single moment. This was not the first time. It would not be the last. Unless something changed. Unless someone made it change. And Darius Cole wasn't just someone. Darius didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. Didn't plead. Didn't demand. He simply stood there tall, composed, holding his boarding pass like it was a shield no one cared to read. The silence was deafening. To some, it looked like surrender. To others, it looked like restraint. But to anyone paying attention, it was a choice. A decision to not become the angry black man they were all waiting to see. Rebecca rolled her eyes. Well, are you just going to stand there all day? We've got places to be. Chloe let out an exaggerated sigh, folding her arms. We're about to close the cabin doors. Either you move to economy or security will be called. Still, Darius didn't move. Instead, he looked at Rebecca, then at Chloe, not with fear, not with frustration, but with something far more unsettling. Certainty. His silence was power, and power makes people uncomfortable. The air in first class had shifted. There was a tension now, thick and sticky, like heat before a thunderstorm. Phones were recording, eyes were watching, and still no one spoke up. Row 3, seat, confrontation begins. Black story. B. A man in a suit typing on his laptop just moments ago froze mid-keystroke. He looked up, blinked, then looked away. A woman scrolling on her phone 2 rows back, locked eyes with Darius for half a second, then turned back to her Instagram feed. Sophia's TikTok stream passed 12,000 viewers, comments flooded, in like a tidal wave. He's literally showing them the ticket. Can't believe this is happening, this is racism. Clear as day. Still, Darius said nothing. And that silence, it screamed louder than any words could. Rebecca shifted uncomfortably, suddenly unsure of herself. What? Cat got your tongue? She scoffed. At least say something if you're going to play the victim. Chloe smirked. Typical. Always making a scene without saying a word. But it wasn't a scene. It was a reckoning. Darius looked down at his watch. The minute hand ticked forward, still calm, still silent. He could have shouted. He could have made a scene, forced compliance, called for authority. Instead, he let them write the story themselves with every assumption, every biased glance, every careless word, and they were writing it well. The only thing they didn't know was who they were writing it about. By the time the gate agent closed the cavern door, Sophia's live stream had already crossed 18,000 viewers. She didn't plan on going viral. At first, it was just instinct. She opened TikTok the way most teens breathe effortlessly without thinking. But what started as a clip of awkward in-flight tension had become something else entirely. The comments came in fast, faster than she could read. Are they really doing this to him? Why won't she check his boarding pass? First class Karen strikes again. People weren't just watching. They were angry, connected, activated. Sophia adjusted her phone slightly, framing Darius and Rebecca in the same shot. The contrast was striking. A calm, composed black man holding his pass. A white woman lounging like royalty, full of entitlement and venom. Down in the terminal, 2 college students waiting for a different flight noticed the stream. One of them was majoring in sociology. He hit screen record. Immediately. On another phone, a flight attendant in the crew lounge watching during her break whispered, "Oh no, that's Orion Air." She recognized the uniform. She recognized the mistake. A high school teacher on her lunch break shared the video to her Facebook group, Teaching Tolerance. Show your students this. Within 20 minutes, Comer Blackfly and Toner Orion bias were trending. Influencers picked it up. Activists reshared it. Civil rights attorneys commented live. Watch this man's silence. It's strategic, it's dignified, and it's the most powerful protest I've seen all year. A former airline exec reposted with a single line, "Who trained this crew?" Darius hadn't moved. He didn't know how viral it had become. He hadn't seen the clips being shared, the duets, the reactions, the Twitter threads, dissecting every word Chloe and Rebecca had said, but he knew. He could feel it. Not the cameras, not the heat, but the shift. The story was no longer just his. It belonged to everyone watching, to every passenger ever looked at twice, to every black man who got asked if he was lost when he stood in first class, to everyone who sat silently because they knew speaking would only make it worse. And now the silence was broken, but not by Darius, by the world watching him. Darius finally moved, but not toward the back. He reached slowly into the pocket of his hoodie and pulled out his phone. The screen lit up with a soft glow, the familiar red and silver logo of Orion Air shining at the top. Rebecca leaned back with a smug grin. "Let me guess, calling your girlfriend to come save you." Chloe chuckled, arms still crossed. "Or maybe customer service. That should go well." Darius said nothing. His fingers glided across the screen with quiet certainty. This wasn't the panicked scroll of someone searching for help. This was methodical, purposeful. He tapped the icon labeled Executive Access. A new interface appeared, one no average passenger had ever seen. Layers of authorization menus, status dashboards, internal systems. The background was jet black. The text clean, precise, corporate at the top of the screen in bold letters. "Welcome Darius Cole, CEO." Sophia gasped quietly behind her phone. She had zoomed in. Her TikTok livestream exploded. "He's the CEO. Oh my God, no way." Rebecca blinked. Her smirk froze mid-formation. "Excuse me, what is that?" Darius turned the screen toward her for a second, just long enough. Her smile died. "That's fake. That has to be fake." But her voice cracked. Chloe stepped forward, unsure now. "Sue, what exactly are you showing us?" Darius looked up for the first time in minutes. "I'm showing you your boss." It wasn't loud. It wasn't angry, but somehow the words hit like thunder. The tension broke, but not the way anyone expected. Chloe's confidence drained from her face. She looked like a student, realizing she just insulted her professor on camera. Rebecca opened her mouth, then closed it. Her brain raced, searching for logic, for a way to make this not real. Her eyes darted to the app, to the name, to the title, to the access codes. Her body went still. The twist revealed. Racist Stories' cabin was quiet now. The phones were still recording, but the story had changed. Darius didn't just belong in first class, he owned it. And this was only the beginning. For the first time since this started, Rebecca was quiet. She stared at the screen like it had betrayed her, like reality itself had rewritten the script she thought she was in charge of. This was supposed to be her moment. The platinum frequent flyer, the elite customer, the woman who knew the system. But the system had just spoken back, and it belonged to the man she tried to erase. Darius didn't move. He didn't smirk. He didn't gloat. He simply turned the screen toward the crew. "Check your internal roster," he said calmly. "Executive Profiles Authorization Number DC0001. Chloe hesitated. Her voice, once so full of command, now trembled with doubt. "Sir, I didn't realize." "You didn't want to realize," Darius replied, his tone still even. "You didn't ask for proof. You just decided I didn't belong." Jacob Monroe, the lead flight attendant, arrived from the galley, clearly unaware of what had just happened. "What's the holdup in first class?" he asked, voice firm. Chloe turned to him quickly. "Jacob, he says he's—" "I'm Darius Cole," Darius said, cutting clean through the tension. "Chief Executive Officer of Orion Air." Jacob blinked. Darius raised the phone again. "Would you like to see the board dashboard or the direct reports list, or maybe the founding documents?" Sophia's livestream viewer count passed 85,000. Rebecca finally spoke, her voice hollow. You're the CEO." Darius nodded once. "That's not possible. I mean, look at you." The words slipped out before she could stop them, and once they were in the air, there was no taking them back. Everyone heard it. Jacob looked at her, then at Darius. then at the sea of phones recording every second. Darius didn't respond to her comment. He didn't need to. Reality had already done the talking, and now it was doing the reckoning. "This seat," Darius said, tapping the leather headrest, "is reserved for Orion CEO on every domestic flight. It's in the system, but that's not really the issue here." Rebecca looked down, suddenly unsure of her entire identity. Darius's eyes met Jacob's. "I suggest you notify the captain. Tell him who's on board." The roles had flipped. The silence had changed. And power, the real kind, was no longer a question. It was in the seat. It was in the room, and everyone knew it. The cabin door opened with a soft click, followed by the unmistakable sound of heavy boots on the jet bridge. 2 airport security officers stepped into the aircraft. One was a tall black man in his 40s with a calm, controlled demeanor. His badge read, "Officer Jamal, Grant." The other, a composed Asian woman with sharp eyes and clipped tone, wore a name tag that read, "Detective Rachel Tanaka." Jacob met them at the front of the cabin, still trying to keep a lid on the fire that had already gone viral. "Officers, thank you. We have a passenger refusing to move to his assigned seat." Tanaka raised an eyebrow. "Is that so?" Jacob pointed toward Darius. "Yes, that gentleman. He insists on sitting in first class even though he clearly doesn't. Have you verified his boarding pass?" Tanaka interrupted. Jacob hesitated. "Well, no, but you assumed," Officer Grant said flatly. Tanaka stepped forward, her eyes locked onto Darius, who remained seated now, relaxed but alert. "Sir, may I see your boarding pass, please?" Her voice was neutral. "Professional." Darius handed it to her without a word. Tanaka scanned it, then looked up. "Cat 2A confirmed." Then she spotted something else. The phone still resting on Darius's lap. The screen was still open, still displaying the executive dashboard. She leaned in slightly. Her voice dropped. "Is this yes?" Darius replied. "I'm Darius Cole, CEO." Tanaka blinked, then nodded. She turned to her partner. "We need to document this." Immediately behind them, Jacob's mouth opened, but no words came out. Officer Grant turned toward the crew and the surrounding passengers. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm. We are now conducting a formal report on a potential discrimination incident." The word hit the cabin like a bolt of electricity. "Discrimination?" Rebecca paused. Chloe instinctively stepped back. Jacob lowered his eyes. Sophia's live stream crossed 120,000 viewers. Darius sat quietly as Tanaka snapped a photo of the boarding pass, then the screen. Grant asked for the names of the involved crew members. Rebecca finally spoke, desperate to salvage control. "Officers, I've flown this airline for years. I'm a Diamond Platinum. I didn't know." "You didn't want to know," Tanaka replied without turning. "You just wanted to be right." The authority was here now. But it hadn't come to protect the powerful. It had come to record the truth. Detective Redemption and Reform. Flight attendant Rachel Tanaka stood beside Officer Grant, flipping her notebook closed with quiet precision. Her voice was calm, but her words had weight. "Mr. Cole, we're documenting this as a formal discrimination incident involving Orion air staff and 1 passenger. Do you wish to press charges at this time?" Darius didn't answer right away. The silence made the question louder. He looked around the cabin, at the faces, at the eyes that were now fixed on him, not with skepticism, but with realization, with shame. "I'm not here for arrests," Darius said finally. "I'm here for accountability." He tapped his phone again, pulling up a different screen, one labeled Legal and Policy. Then he made a call. "Put me through to Orion Air General Counsel." The phone rang once. "This is Sylvia Jenkins." "Sylvia, this is Darius Cole. I need you to initiate an internal compliance report. Flight 932 Seattle to DC. There's been a confirmed bias incident. I want the full legal documentation drafted before wheels up." "Yes, sir. Do you want external counsel involved?" "Not yet, but alert the PR crisis team. We may need full transparency within the hour." Passengers blinked. It wasn't just a viral moment anymore, it was an executive response. Real, swift, irreversible. Chloe took a step forward, her voice low, shaking. "Mr. Cole, I didn't mean to." "But you did," Darius interrupted gently but firmly. "You looked at me and made a decision. You refused to verify facts. You dismissed me without asking a single question." She tried to speak again, but couldn't. Jacob followed. "Sir, please, if we had known—" Darius stood now. He wasn't angry. He didn't need to be. "You didn't care to know," he said. "That's the problem." Rebecca sat frozen in seat 2A, still gripping the armrests like they were anchors in a storm she could no longer control. "Miss Palmer," Darius said calmly, "you didn't just disrespect a passenger. You tried to erase a person based on appearance, based on comfort, based on your own expectations of who belongs where." She looked down, unable to meet his gaze. Sophia's live stream hit 150,000 viewers. "Every decision you made," Darius continued, "was recorded. Every assumption, every word, and now every consequence will follow." Officer Grant took a deep breath. "Mr. Cole, we're ready to file this report." Darius nodded. "Do it." The truth had been spoken. Now came the consequences. By the time the aircraft began its taxi toward the runway, the outside world had already caught fire. Sophia's live stream passed 200,000 viewers. Flooded timelines. Darius Cole, Seek 22A. Orion bias and Dow flying, while black were trending simultaneously across platforms: TikTok, Twitter, Instagram Reels, all pulsing with the same story from different angles. Videos stitched, reactions posted, screenshots with timestamps, freeze frames of Chloe's dismissive posture, of Rebecca's smirk, of Darius holding up the boarding pass. No one wanted to see. The story had fractured into thousands of digital voices, and yet every single one repeated the same truth. This man was judged before he was heard. This is what racism looks like in a suit and smile. He owned the airline, and they still told him he didn't belong. Newsrooms scrambled. Editors yelled across desks. Notifications lit up phones in boardrooms. At Orion Air headquarters in Atlanta, the PR team's group chat turned from emojis to full-blown crisis mode in less than 3 minutes. CNN picked it up. So did MSNBC, NBC, BuzzFeed, and The Washington Post. Trending topics were no longer just entertainment. They were indictments. Live on air. A civil rights attorney said it best. What we saw here was not a mistake. It was a pattern, a system in real time. Meanwhile, influencers with massive followings were reposting Sophia's footage. Some stitched their own messages onto the end. "I fly Orion. Not anymore. I was in first class once. They stared at me the same way." One retired flight captain tweeted, "There is no training manual that tells you to ignore a boarding pass. That was bias. Period." The stock market hadn't even opened yet, but financial analysts were already forecasting turbulence. And all the 1 year later. Touching stories. While Darius sat quietly in his seat, not as a passenger, not even as a CEO, but as a symbol, his face now represented a question America couldn't keep ignoring. Who decides who belongs? Rebecca stared out the window, but there was nothing out there to escape into. Chloe sat pale and frozen, the magnitude of what had unfolded finally settling into her bones. And Jacob paced in the galley, trying to remember when exactly everything had gone wrong. It wasn't just the internet. It was the mirror it held up, and no one could look away. When the flight reached cruising altitude, the silence inside the cabin was no longer about shock. It was about fallout. Officer Tanaka had taken full statements. Officer Grant had submitted the preliminary report to both the airport and the FAA. Now all that remained was consequence. And it started with Chloe. She approached Darius slowly, like a student walking toward a principal's desk after failing a test she didn't know she was taking. "Mr. Cool," she began, voice trembling, I want to apologize." Darius looked up calm. "Darius, as ever. Is this your first time assuming someone's not who they say they are?" She swallowed. "Now then, it's not a mistake," he replied. It's a pattern, and patterns have consequences. She said nothing more. Darius tapped his phone again. The HR department at Orion had already submitted a draft of disciplinary measures. Chloe Simmons' 6-month unpaid suspension, mandatory anti-bias training, psychological evaluation prior to reinstatement, final warning status upon return. She read the email over his shoulder. Tears welled in her eyes. "I can learn," she whispered. "Then start with listening," Darius replied. Jacob Monroe's turn came next. As lead flight attendant, he carried additional responsibility, both in protocol and in precedent. His disciplinary order was firm: immediate demotion to support staff, 20% salary reduction, and a 2-year probationary period under direct supervision. When he read it, he looked up, stunned. "Sir, I've worked here 12 years. I've trained half this crew." Darius nodded. "Then you trained them wrong." Jacob nodded slowly. "You're right." In the middle of all of it sat Rebecca Palmer. She hadn't moved, but her phone had someone from her own. Company had texted her. A screenshot of Sophia's video, a headline from The Atlantic. Marketing executive caught in first-class meltdown after humiliating black CEO. And then the next message, "Call HR immediately." Her hands shook as she opened her LinkedIn profile. Hundreds of comments, thousands of reposts. Her carefully crafted image vanished in less than an hour. She looked at Darius with tears forming. "Please don't ruin my life." Darius stared at her unblinking. "I didn't ruin anything," he said. "You did." She broke down quietly as the consequences landed, not as punishment, but as a reflection of who she had chosen to be when she thought no one was watching, but everyone was. Darius didn't speak for applause. He never raised his voice, never demanded attention, but when he stood, the cabin listened. He didn't just stand as a man wronged. He stood as a man in power and in purpose. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice steady, calm, and clear, "I want to apologize." Heads turned, not out of confusion, but because no one expected that sentence. "I want to apologize that this kind of thing still happens, that a man like me, anyone who looks like me, can be presumed out of place in a seat he paid for on an airline he runs." The room was silent. "No company is perfect," he continued. "But the difference between excuses and integrity is what happens next." He pulled out his phone again, tapped the Orion Air app, and opened the executive policy dashboard. Effective immediately, Darius said, "Orion Air is launching a new company-wide protocol, one that goes beyond reactive training." He looked around the cabin, letting the closing thoughts, heartwarming stories, weight of his words land. "We call it the Dignity Program." A few passengers nodded. A few crew members froze. "Every customer F-facing employee from ticket counter to pilot will be required to complete quarterly amphibious training," he said. "Not once. Every quarter," he continued, unwavering. "All aircraft will be fitted with body camera devices for flight crew. Every passenger interaction involving conflict will be recorded and reviewed independently." The impact was instant. Even those who had been silent felt the ground shifting under them. Additionally, he said, "We are allocating $40 million annually to bias prevention, employee education, and third-party audits. Not marketing, not PR, real change." The crew shifted in their positions, some embarrassed, some inspired, all silent. "We can't control what people assume when they look at someone," Darius added. "But we can make sure that those assumptions don't cost someone their dignity." He turned toward the back of the cabin. "And we're not starting next year. We're starting now." Sophia's live stream surged past 250,000 viewers. One comment echoed louder than the rest. "This is what leadership looks like." Darius didn't smile. He didn't mean to. He wasn't there to impress. He was there to change something. And he just had the plane touch down just before 6 p.m. There was no applause, no dramatic music, just the usual jolt of rubber on asphalt, and a quiet hum of jet engines slowing to stillness. But everything had changed. Chloe, once the first to speak, remained silent as she helped passengers gather their things. Her eyes were different now, not just ashamed, but open. She had started the journey assuming she understood people. She ended it knowing she had a lot to learn. 3 weeks later, she would complete her suspension and return not as a flight attendant, but as a facilitator for Orion's new bias prevention training, and not because she was forced to, because she asked to. Jacob would step back from leadership and instead join a newly formed feedback program. His experience now used to build bridges rather than break trust. And Rebecca Palmer, she would leave her job within the month, not because she was fired, but because she could no longer pretend to be someone she wasn't. She began volunteering at a community justice center in D.C. where no one cared about her miles or status, only her willingness to show up and serve. And Darius, he returned to C2 a month later. Different route, different crew, same purpose. This time, no one questioned his presence, not because of who he was, but because of what had changed. Respect didn't flow from a title. It grew from culture, from leadership that didn't just punish ignorance, but replaced it with understanding. Darius once said, "Change doesn't happen because you talk about fairness. It happens because you operationalize it." And he did. Across the airline industry, new programs were launched, training rewritten, cameras installed, passenger experience redefined. One viral moment had become the blueprint for a movement. If you've ever been overlooked, underestimated, or judged before you spoke, you already understand what this story was really about. It's not just about a seat. It's about how easily we confuse comfort with correctness, and how often we treat dignity like a privilege, when in truth, it's a human right. If this story moved you, share it, talk about it, reflect on it, because someone on your next flight, in your office, in your daily routine, needs to know that people do change and that justice isn't loud. It's quiet until it isn't. This has been a Black story, and maybe now it's your story too.